Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week we're doing things a little bit differently. It's the end of the year, and because 2020 was such an insane year, I want to do a special episode that covers everything a little bit differently than usual. Instead of one guest today, we'll have three, as Random House Graphics publishing director Gina Gagliano, Third Eye Comics owner Steve Anderson, and The Beat's Heidi MacDonald are joining the show to share the defining theme for the year from the perspective of a publisher, comic shop, and journalist, respectively. They're not appearing at the same time, though. They'll each be in separate sections. I'm going to timestamp each of them, and you can jump into the one that interests you the most. But I really recommend listening to all three because they have fantastic perspective on the year that was. Up first is Gina Gagliano, as Random House Graphics head joins me to talk about a year of revolutionary change. Here she is. Yo, everybody, I'm here with Gina Gagliano, Random House Graphics publishing director. Gina's here to talk about 2020 in comics from the publishing perspective, and she's someone who knows the world well, having previously worked in marketing and publicity for First Second pretty much since the beginning of their existence, right?
Yep. I started working at First Second in 2005.
And they were founded in 2005, I think, right?
Yep, their first books came out in 2006.
Okay, and then you headed over to Random House Graphic, who had its big launch this year and has had a fantastic year of comics. Is there anything I'm missing from your core comics bio in that little spiel?
I mean, that is my core comics bio. There's all sorts of other more tangential comics projects that I've done. I'm one of the comics co-chairs for the Brooklyn Book Festival right now. There's a lot of comics festivals that I've worked on programming for, including the Toronto Comics Art Festival and the Museum of Comic and Cartoon Art. And I am working on wrapping up the very end of a sporadic podcast project called Graphic Novel TK, which is about a look into the behind the scenes of the comics publishing industry and how the publishing process works.
I love it. Also, I will compliment you. I think that maybe more than any other individual I've ever met in comics, you seem to know everyone, and everyone seems to know you, which is, I don't know, you have I have to imagine you, if such a thing still existed, you would have the biggest Rolodex in comics. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it seems like you do.
Oh, well, that's so nice of you to say. I do not, in fact, have a Rolodex, and I am not in my office right now because I've been working from home since the middle of March. But I do have a bulletin board that is on the wall behind my desk, and I have organized little hangers of business cards all across it.
Wow.
And everyone does tend to come in the office and say, what is that? And then they're kind of shocked and appalled that there can be so many business cards in all of the world.
That's probably a lot of business cards. But I mean, this is part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you for this podcast, because you know comics from the marketing and publicity, you know it from publishing, you know this world in a lot of different ways. And the whole thing about this podcast is I'm having three different guests on to talk about the defining theme for the year from different perspectives. And your theme, when I asked you, was revolutionary change. Why was that the theme of the year when you were thinking about the question that I posited to you?
This year has been tough, and it's been complicated, and coming out of the end of it, which we're not at quite yet. I mean, the thing that I really think about when I'm thinking about this year is that going into the beginning of 2020, so many things looked nothing like what they look like now, from marketing and publicity at publishers, from how bookstores and libraries are working, from how graphic novel publishing was working, both in the office and then in the changes in the industry that have been happening, and then from, the way that we talk to each other and the way that we meet up with people and talk to authors, like all of that is just so different than it was back in January 2020.
Yeah. I mean, just looking back to your previous role, marketing and publicity, I imagine for Random House Graphics' first big year, you had probably plans for book tours and for, media engagements and, going to schools and doing all kinds of things like that. And I have to imagine that was a big record scratch. Like, you had to find new ways to do things you've been doing for a long time to promote these books, but in like a virtual experience, in an online experience, in a completely different way than you were used to.
Yeah, and Nicole Valdez is our marketing and publicity manager at Random House Graphic, and she's awesome. And she really took on this heroic task, or already the heroic task, to launch this whole imprint, which was then complicated by all of her plans for the year getting thrown out the window in mid-March, so that she had to kind of start back from square one to figure out how to reach readers and get people excited about our books. So, we did a number of conferences at the beginning of the year in February and March. And then, that all kind of turned on a dime to virtual events. And it also turned on a dime into other things, like re-looking at our e-newsletter and what we're doing with that. Is it a good way that we are, is the content of that good? Is the frequency of it good? Is the way it's reaching out to people good? And things like, we are kind of working on a slow build on our social media and, being like, okay, we're going to gradually get readers on this as we get more books. But when that turns into a main way that people are now getting news and engagement with publishers, our focus on that had to shift a whole lot. And then on top of that, there's just the thing that the other half of marketing and publicity, which is, the retailers, the comic book sellers, the booksellers, the librarians, like the people who partner with us to get books out to people, their jobs have radically changed. Bookstores are closed. They're doing curbside pickup. They're, mailing orders out to customers in ways that they haven't done. Libraries are doing virtual story times. They're doing virtual programs. And then working with teachers and librarians on like virtual conferences and events, and how to transition the experience of something like the American Library Association conference or the National Council of Teachers of English conference into the internet. And that turns out to not just be like, let's have all the panels, but let's have them online. Like, there's other aspects of like, how do you connect people and how do you get that sort of social engagement and conversation between people that you used to have? And how does that work with school-age teachers who are working with kids? Like, how do you get that level of interaction and conversation with students in the classroom if they're in a virtual classroom, or if they're in a combination synchronous, asynchronous virtual classroom?
Yeah.
Or if they're in a physical classroom, which we are not going to send our authors into right now, like looking at their welfare and their safety. We're like, we want you to reach kids, but we can't do it by engaging with these schools in the way that we used to. Mm-hmm. So it just has, I think this is such a big part of the revolutionary change theme, where it's just been looking at all of this in different ways. And then the things that have come out of it, where you look at virtual conferences and see there are people going to the different panels on everything from San Diego Comic-Con to the American Library Association conference to Book Expo America in numbers like they never had before, presumably because people couldn't afford to, fly to another state and put themselves up in a hotel and pay the registration for a conference, but they're still excited and interested in this. And if Book Expo is going to air this panel for free, then people are going to watch it. So how does that new data that we have, that there's such a bigger audience for this content that's already stuff that we are working on, change the way we're thinking about how we reach readers in 2021 and 2022 and 2023?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that's one of the most interesting things about 2020 isn't what happened in 2020. It's what happens with all these learnings that everyone took away from the year. I mean, like look at comic shops, for example. Comic shop owners and clerks and everyone else became like delivery drivers, and they became like Facebook Live hosts, and they became all these different things that they probably never imagined that they would need to be. But is there value in those things? And I have to imagine maybe not all of the answers are yes, but I bet a lot of them are. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. And, it's just so many people are interacting with their jobs in very different ways and their staff in very different ways. I talked to one librarian, a school librarian, who said that his job is now teaching all the kids at school to use the virtual library software to place holds on books. Mm-hmm. And then he drives to all of their houses on a rotation every week to drop off packages of books for everyone.
That is amazing.
And I don't know that that's like the permanent solution of how school libraries should be interacting with children. It seems like it might not be practical in the long term, but what does that, increased facility with the digital catalog mean for future kids? And, is it transitioning like school library readers over to ebooks in any way, or is it just making school libraries a bigger part of their education if they can access them from their computers as well as, during their 20-minute, afternoon class break?
Another thing that's interesting for this is like, take somebody like Trung Le Nguyen, who did The Magic Fish, an excellent book. One thing I think I've talked to nonprofits about stuff like this, where they were able to get access to speakers that they wouldn't normally be able to get because of everyone's comfortable with the virtual environment now. Maybe like when Trung writes the second book of whatever is going to happen with Random House Graphic, let's say there's something that comes from that. And, is he going to, are virtual tours going to be more comfortable then? Like all of a sudden you don't have to just, physically go to Kansas City and then physically go to New York and then physically go to, Tallahassee or something like that. All of it can happen from Minnesota, where Trung is. And like, that's pretty magical. I mean, I'm not saying that you necessarily want that, because I think that in-person interaction's there, but at the same time, like that type of efficiency and everything is pretty fantastic. That stuff will be really interesting to see how it goes going forward. Because as somebody who lives in Alaska, we don't get a lot of visitors. The virtual experience is very favorable to our bookstores and our comic shops.
Yeah, definitely. And, I've talked about this to Trung a little bit, after The Magic Fish came out, because he's been doing so many events. And, there's the thing where if he had been physically going to this many events, like first, like, would we be able to afford him to send him to a different state every week?
Right.
And also, with flights and travel time and, staying overnight in places because he's speaking in the evening, or staying overnight in places because he's speaking in the morning, like how much of his time that he's currently spending on working on his second book for us would he be spending at an airport, or in a hotel?
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, these virtual events still take, they still take time. They still take, you have to do a virtual test, and you have to make sure the software works, and you have to prepare for the topics you're going to speak about and all of that. So it's not like a, completely frictionless, like you just show up and then it's totally fine.
Right.
But there's definitely a lot of different time and energy costs that work differently.
Yeah.
In the virtual space.
Well, I do want to ask, I mean, I think one of the interesting things, and I think this can be the case in a lot of coverage about comics in general, is the pandemic. A lot of the coverage about comics seemed to focus on like the direct market and how, Diamond shut down for a time, and, et cetera, all kinds of related issues. You didn't really hear as much about the book market. And when I say the book market, for listeners that don't know, this is a very broad, perhaps unnecessarily broad term that represents really bookstores, independent bookstores like your Amazon, Scholastic book fairs, God, what am I missing? Libraries, etc. Like, it's a very all-encompassing term that basically just means anything that's not comic shops. I'm interested in your perspective on what the impact was there, because that's the biggest part of Random House Graphics world. Like, was there as significant of chaos might be an overstated word, but it's not totally wrong. Was there a similar amount of, disorder in that world, or was it a little bit more orderly, like through the year for the book market?
Well, the book distributors didn't shut down. So that is a lot different. I think that led to a different year for book market retailers than comic book stores. And the book market has a lot of different distributors. So in the way where Diamond is the primary distributor for comic stores and the only place that people can get some material, when they shut down, that is a problem in the way that it wouldn't be if there was a distributor in the book market who had to shut down for a few weeks, because most stores have accounts with multiple different places, so they could just call up one of their other distributors and be like, these people shut down. Can you send me the 50 books that I had on back order with them instead?
Right.
But definitely March and April were, as you said, completely chaotic. No one knew, were bookstores shutting down? Were libraries shutting down? They were shutting down. When are they going to reopen? Are people still going to be able to buy books when bookstores and libraries are shutting down? How does it affect the budgets that they have and the way that they're going to get behind things? Will there still be internet shopping? Like all of that. I talk a lot to Kristen McLean at BookScan, which is the book industry numbers data organization. And I think last month, her verdict on comics and graphic novels for the year is that they're up. And kids comics are up, adult comics are up, manga is up, superhero comics are up, and that 2020 has been a better year for sales for comics in the book market, which is what BookScan largely does numbers on, than 2019 was.
Wow.
And that definitely isn't what I thought was going to happen at the book market, in that mid-March, April sort of range of things.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's great news. And, we talk a lot about, some of the powerhouse kids properties, but beyond that, we're seeing that YA comics are up. We're seeing that younger chapter book age comics are up, along with middle grade. And we're seeing that manga is up and adult comics are up. So I look at this and I think, maybe what happens when we have a tough year is that people need books for entertainment to deal with it. They need books for education to deal with it. They need books to, give as gifts to people.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other half of that, I think, what happens to the people who are unemployed or facing financial hardship right now? Like, the book sales are up, but who are those books being sold to?
Right. I don't have a good answer for that. I mean, it is. I do think it's an interesting position that comics finds, the broader comics world finds itself in, because I wrote about this recently, and I'm not trying to say that like comics should be opportunistic about this, but with like movies and TV shows being harder to produce right now, and with like kind of a, I don't want to say a dearth of entertainment, because there's still plenty coming out. I mean, like every single week there's like 50 new Netflix things, and so people are not lacking in that regard. But what I've noticed is like my friends and my friends with kids in particular have shown more interest in comics than in the past. And like, a good example is my friend Brian. His daughter is 8, and I loaned the two of them Bone, the 1 volume edition, and I loaned them Amulet, Kazu Kibuishi's Amulet. And within a week, she had read all of it, and she loved it. And she had never read a single comic before, and she'd never given a comic a chance before. And I think part of it was just because I guess there's like a theoretical limit to how many times you could watch Frozen 2, and I think she might have met it. And and so it's interesting because now she's really interested in this stuff. Also, she really wants to find out when Kazu's coming out with the last story for Amulet, which I will not ask him because I know he's been asked like a million times. But at the same time, I do think that's interesting that, like, I don't know who is buying these books, but I do think that maybe part of the reason, and Bookscan would probably know this better than I would, maybe part of the reason why those numbers are up is because there's maybe interest from sections of the world that would not have read it if it weren't read comics if it weren't for this. And I think that's extremely good for the present and the future of comics. I mean, that's part of the revolutionary change. Maybe the audience for comics has expanded because of this. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think on on an associated note to that, one of the big changes in the industry is that, Scholastic Graphics and First Second had been powering away, doing their publishing since 2005, 2006. And this year has been a big change in the kids market, with Random House Graphic debuting a kids and YA line in the winter. And then in the fall, Houghton Mifflin's kids graphic novel publisher Etch and HarperCollins kids graphic novel publisher kicking off. So you have a whole new set of voices in the market.
Yeah.
And, with that, what you get is not only more books, but more variety. You get more different authors, more different genres, more books for all of these different readers. And that's great. That expands the audience of comics, so that if your kid is looking for books with giants or books with dinosaurs, the answer is not like, oh, well, there was one book about dinosaurs 5 years ago. It's like, okay, there's this great series by Abby Howard. And when you're done with that, you can read the M.K. Reed and Joe Flood Science Comics Dinosaurs. And you can read the Jim Ottaviani paleontologist history about dinosaurs too.
Yeah. I think that's extremely, having more answers for the same questions, like, oh, what's a good comic about a dinosaur? Or like, here's a great example. You just reminded me that I was going to buy Aster and the Accidental Magic for my niece. And so that, for somebody, not to paint with too broad of a stroke, but it's just like, for somebody who loves Hilda, that she does, that's like something that scratches a similar itch. And it's such a good book. I love it. But yeah, I think that's interesting. It's like, it seems, I guess the last question I want to ask you is, like, in regards to the revolutionary growth, do you think that amongst all of this, all of the troubles that came up, all of the problems, do you think that within, not to make this too much of a making lemons out of lemonade type, or lemonade out of lemons type of thing, but do you think that there's opportunity here? Do you think that this could lead to, exciting opportunities in the future for, varying publishers?
I think anytime something changes, there are opportunities, right? I know that I myself have learned a whole lot this year, both from doing things in a different way, seeing the market change, but then also just, figuring out how to work from home, which I've never done in my life before, and having a team of people that I'm working with that are, in all different states, and authors kind of around the country who I'm not seeing at conferences and conventions, and who aren't, coming to New York to, meet with us and talk about their books in the same way. So things are really different. And I think that anytime things are really different, there is opportunity. I know people this year who have gotten really inspired and, got inspired to do something new. They've gotten inspired to, write and draw their graphic novel faster than expected. I've worked with people this year who have had really difficult life circumstances and have had to change their approach to what they're doing. So there's this whole spectrum of experiences that everyone's been having in this extremely stressful year. And I think there's lemonade. I think there's lemons. I'm not sure what the third thing that there would be in this metaphor, but probably a terrible thing. Lemon, I like lemons. I think that they're good. So I'm lemons are bad in this metaphor, but they're maybe not bad enough to indicate
maybe the third one
negative.
Is just, yeah, the third one's just eating the rind by itself or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. But, so, and I don't, I've seen some graphic novel projects on submission that are, kind of inspired by a history of this year or of COVID itself or about kind of dealing with the pandemic. So there's clearly those direct things, but I definitely think that the industry is going to be just changed by all of the different ways that we've had the opportunity and the necessity to do things this year. So there's so much that is not anything that a publisher would ever do, not doing any in-person events for 9 months.
Right.
That's just going to change how we think about how to do events going forward, even when we're not all stuck in our apartments.
I mean, it's definitely going to reframe a lot of things. It'll be interesting to see how everything plays out. But Gina, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about this crazy year and the revolutionary change that's coming along with it.
Thanks, David. It was fun to talk to you.
That was Gina Gagliano from Random House Graphic. And up next is Steve Anderson, the owner of Third Eye Comics, a chain of 6 comics, games, and pop culture shops in the Maryland and Virginia areas. He's joining me to chat about a surprising trend he noticed this year at his comic shops. Here he is. Yo, everybody. I'm here with Steve Anderson from Third Eye Comics, a retailing superstar of superstars, and we're here to talk about 2020 in comics retail, albeit from a very specific angle. Before that, Steve, I know it's been a big year for Third Eye as you've had all kinds of answers to this year's problems and even opened 2 new shops, which is amazing. For listeners that don't know, would you mind sharing a little bit about Third Eye and what you do before we get into the theme for 2020 for comics retail?
Yeah, absolutely. So Third Eye Comics has been in business since 2008. It is a 6-store chain that is, still very mom and pop. And we have locations in Annapolis, Maryland. That's our 2 biggest stores, Third Eye Comics and Third Eye Games. Combined total of 14,000 square feet for those. And then we have locations in Lexington Park, Maryland, Waldorf, Maryland, Richmond, Virginia, and Richmond, Virginia. We have 2 in Richmond, Virginia. And our stores are pretty much just pop culture wonderlands. We sell everything from comics to records to skateboards to games to toys. If it's got a fandom, we sell it, and we love it. But I mean, our bread and butter and the thing that really is the skeleton of Third Eye, the thing that is what it's built on, is comic books and graphic novels, and that's always been that way, and that'll always be that way.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. I can account for that because the only time I've ever actually met you was at Comics Pro in Portland, Oregon, which is I feel like that's an elite class of ultra comic nerd if you go to Comics Pro. Granted, that's actually work for you. I actually took a specific vacation to go to that. I don't know what that says about me, Steve, but at the same time, it was a great time hanging out with you there. But
it means you're awesome.
I love it. Well, let's jump into that theme because I reached out to you for this and asked you because comics retail, there's no way to represent all of it. There's no way to represent everything that happened in any year, let alone 2020, which was crazy. But I asked you for a defining theme, in your opinion, for comics retail for the year. And I'm not going to lie, your answer surprised me. I told you that. But I want to start there. What was your defining idea for comics retail this year?
So defining idea, there was a lot of different things, about how we do business that were important to us. But there was also a lot of concerns about the effects of COVID in terms of what it did to the comic book marketplace, because it pretty much completely changed it. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. With the way distribution changed up and everything else and the different methods that we have to get things to people. And the biggest thing, the most overwhelming concern that I've had probably throughout the last 6 months is what that means for backlist and backlist graphic novels. Now, I know that sounds weird, but
wait, before you jump into your explanation, backlist meaning all of the older stock, right?
Yeah, like your Long Halloween, your Killing Joke, your Civil War, your Secret War, your Siege, your Secret Invasion, your Demon in a Bottle. These are books that may not turn over the same kind of numbers that like a new graphic novel like a Three Jokers will, but they're always, for the most part, going to sell, or you're going to turn over one of them and it'll lead to sales on something else. With Diamond kind of losing DC Comics, I've been watching a different approach to how graphic novels are distributed to stores. I've always used multiple vendors, and I've used everything from Ingram to Penguin to everything in between. So it's not that different for me to order from multiple vendors. That's something that's pretty normal. I mean, I have a store that's purely tabletop games. They probably use 20 different vendors alone. With the graphic novels, though, what I've been seeing is that basically some of it's probably due to printing issues, because I know everything is backed up with COVID. Some of it is probably distribution, but without that centralized hub like Diamond, where basically you were getting your trades, you were getting everything, a lot of stuff's just vanishing. And I have a weird suspicion that we're going to see a shift in the market where I think it's going to be almost like records, where you're going to see basically lots of reissues of the bangers,
hits.
You know what I mean? Like Purple Rain and,
right.
Houses of the Holy. You'll see a new trade dress of Blackest Night every few years. You'll see a new trade dress of Civil War every few years. But I think you're going to lose all of the other stuff in the middle that really helps sustain a store that makes money off of graphic novels. And that's, the stuff that doesn't turn over every week, like your Cosmic Odyssey or your, Stray Bullets, you know what I mean? Like stuff that's great and stuff that fans will lead to other sales, but it doesn't turn over. And I don't know why, but I feel like we're going to see that accelerated because of the change in distribution.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's actually been kind of not to this degree, but the idea that the backlist has been kind of softening in the last few years has been a concern. I know I've read that with Brian Hibbs, because if I remember correctly, one of the things that's kind of made this a bit of a problem in the past has been something as simple as the New 52 coming and then Rebirth coming. And then all of a sudden you had almost a decade of DC Comics where effectively your non-bangers, we'll use bangers as the term going forward. The non-bangers, the normal New 52 stuff, the new normal Rebirth stuff, that was starting to lose its power in terms of resale value, because DC kept saying effectively, this doesn't totally matter anymore. So it's why would I read Detective Comics 5th volume from New 52, regardless of how good that is? I think that was Tomasi and Gleason, so it was probably pretty good. But at the same time, it's I feel like we've kind of seen that for a while, especially given, so you have that. And then also Marvel. I mean, I don't know if you see this, but a lot of consumers, a lot of readers I talk to say that they just do not like Marvel's trades. And so when you kind of combine all this together, I could see this being a concern. But for you, why, why would losing not the bangers, but those periphery books, the ones that let's say somebody comes in and they want to buy Infinity Gauntlet, but now they can't buy Cosmic Odyssey. Why is that such an impact?
because the way that people read, especially trade buyers. So a good trade buyer is somebody who, they're going to come in and buy 3 or 4 trades at a time. And those 3 or 4 trades that they're going to get aren't always going to be, the top 40.
Right.
They're going to bounce around. They're going to need to read things to sustain that kind of reader. So you're able to bring them back to your store, more frequently. You've got to have that sequence for them to follow. I'm not saying that you should keep everything in print. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be in print. There's just a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be in print ever, just because the sales on it are going to be nothing. But the thing that's weird is as you see the softening of backlist, you're going to see stuff that you're like, okay, cool. I'm not going to miss most of the new 52 trades. You know what I mean?
Right.
No harm, no foul. But then stuff starts getting lumped in there. So, take Infinity Gauntlet, for example. It is an easy sale to see somebody grab Infinity Gauntlet and then go to Infinity Crusade, Infinity War, et cetera, and work their way through, because that's how comic readers work. They want to read one thing and then they want to read the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's something, just maybe we're an anomaly, but all my stores, that's the readership pattern for a lot of buyers.
I mean, I know that's the case too. The interesting thing is, and to really boil this down, are you kind of more, it seems to me that you're probably less worried with your habitual Wednesday Warrior customers who would, buy trades and they know where to go and everything like that. It's the people who come in to buy that one trade that you normally would be able to turn to 4 trades, and then maybe later down the line, keep them coming back for more trades. So you're kind of in some way,
it's the new reader.
Yeah. You're kind of concerned of turning, normally you'd be able to turn that tourist into a resident. And now you're concerned that you won't be able to make that conversion.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is, because there are people who only read and trade, and that's their preferred format. And they want to read, as much as they can. They want to follow through. And there's no reason why all the Grant Morrison Batman should not be in print.
Right.
Quality aside, I'm not saying it's good. Good. We're not talking about whether it's good or bad. I liked it, but I know not everybody did.
Mm-hmm.
But it sells.
Right.
It sells because it has key points that hook people in. Whoa, Batman might be dead. Whoa, Dick Grayson's Batman. Whoa, Damian Wayne's a jerk.
Yeah.
Easy sale.
Yeah.
Easy sale.
Yeah.
That's fun. But there also isn't really a need for us to have, every Batman trade, from, the 2000s in print. You know what I mean? And it's a fine line, and I guess it's weird. But the thing that I'm most worried about is I don't want to see everything getting swept away to the point where we're only putting out the new releases and then reissuing your top 40.
Mm-hmm. No, that totally makes sense. I stopped reading for, 3 or 4 years in 1999 to, let's say, 2003. And the comics that got me back into it were Why the Last Man, The Walking Dead, and Fables. I went to my shop, and a clerk recommended that I buy the first volumes of each of those. And if I was only, let's say I was a customer today and I had that same conversation, if they recommended that I do that, but the only trade that was available was the first volume, which a lot of shops normally, they'll often carry just the first volume and the most recent volume. And if that was the case, I might have stopped, because I didn't just buy the first volume that day. I bought several volumes, and so it's
exactly
the inability to keep that person going, to sustain that person, that I could see that becoming a big problem. But so, Steve, one thing I'm really curious about, the thing that this seems like something that's been building, but what about 2020 exacerbated this issue and made it something that was really top of mind? Because, not to put you on blast or anything from the email, but you described yourself as being obsessed with this issue. And I could see why, but why is this a 2020 obsession?
I just think it's because it's something that's going to get lost. I don't think anybody really sees the importance of it. 100%. I don't think, and I know that sounds weird, you know what I mean? Because I'm sure these trades, make a good percentage of sales. But I think the overwhelming narrative about graphic novels is what you said, oh, I'm just going to order the first volume. I'm only going to order the last volume. I don't need to stock all of this. I don't need to stock all of that. And I don't really think that's always the case. I think that there's a lot of stores out there that, I think there's a lot of people who are like, why don't I have this? All right, I'll give you a perfect example. this is where it gets dicey. Killing Joke.
Mm-hmm.
I can only get Killing Joke one place right now.
Penguin?
Now that's not a big deal in the Diamond days, right? Because, and I'm not like one of those guys who's like upset about the shift in distributors or anything like that. Like, I mean, I'll work within whatever framework you got me, as long as my discount is fair and I can get the product. That's all I care about, you know? But Killing Joke in the Diamond days, that would never be gone. It'll always be there. It's just how it goes. You know, you'd have to have like the Dark Knight would have to come out and there'd have to be a run on it or something. Killing Joke now, man, there's if you don't count Diamond, because they're still carrying some DC books, but they're letting it all kind of like, you know, phase out.
Right.
There's 4 if you count Ingram, 4 different vendors who should be stocking Killing Joke. 1 out of the 4 has it.
Is it Penguin?
No.
Lunar?
Lunar.
Wow.
Yep.
That's isn't that not their job? I thought Penguin was their book distributor.
That's the thing, man. And that's the thing is like when you start kind of like the level, see, that's the thing. Like it's hard to put this into words, but like if people don't understand the importance of the backlist, then Killing Joke and Cosmic Odyssey look a whole lot alike when they're looking at the data.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's like if you're not somebody, you know, Diamond, they have like institutional knowledge, and as much as you might like dislike them as an individual or as an organization or something like that, the thing is they can differentiate there. But
just on the record, I'm cool with Diamond.
No, and honestly,
me and Diamond are cool. I like them.
Historically, you're cool with everybody, Steve, and that's a good thing. But at the same time, it's like it'd be one thing if it was Cosmic Odyssey, but the Killing Joke, I mean, like that is one of the fabled evergreen comics from DC's line. Part of the reason why DC has always been superior, in my opinion, to Marvel in terms of the book distribution side is because they have all these evergreen books, Killing Joke, Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, etc., that they can say, hey, this is a book you can buy and you can read in one sitting and you'll get all of it. And that's that. And they've always sold because of that. The Killing Joke not being available, that's like the canary in the coal mine. That's the weird part.
Yep. And that's the thing. We've seen it happen with other books. And like you said, DC is the backlist. They are the spot for it. You know what I mean? Like that's their bread and butter. And I think that's why 2020 for me has been the big concern, because I feel like, I don't know, man. Like, I feel like we're seeing kind of patterns that are going to lead to less of a reliance on backlist as a sales driver for the direct market. And maybe I'm crazy, you know, maybe I'm looking at things, you know, in a way that, you know, isn't right, but I don't know. It seems weird to me. And there's so much other stuff like that. And I know we're in the middle of like, you know, some unprecedented stuff. So, I mean, I get it, man. Print runs are backed up and things are happening and people are working, you know, under, you know, some really, really tough conditions. So like, I get it, but like, I think that there's a ton of focus on the other things that changed in distribution this year, but there's very little talk about backlist. And I don't know, maybe we're alone in this, but it's a big part of the sales for almost all my stores. It's a big part of our success.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the fact that so many comic shops are kind of reorienting themselves around being like bookstores in a way. I mean, it's like, I talked to you before about Big Bang. Big Bang excels at graphic novels. You talk about like Comics Experience in San Francisco, excels as a bookstore. Yep. You know, Isotope, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many shops that thrive as almost like bookstore adjacent places. And if the backlist goes, that's going to really hamper what they're doing. But I do want to ask, you know, we've talked a lot about DC. Is this strictly a DC issue, or is this kind of a little everywhere?
Widespread.
It's widespread?
It's everywhere. Image has gotten really good. They worried me a little bit over the summer, but I think they just had some issues, maybe warehousing. I don't know. But
I think they were locked. They had some inventory locked at Diamond, didn't they?
I think that might have been it. Yeah. So image in terms of availability is really good. Image is very much tapped in. Marvel, there's a lot of Marvel stuff that, like, you know, Venom Volume 4 for the Donny Cates run just came back into print, you know, like, and you know, that's something like, you know, like it's just weird stuff like that. And then you can look at like, you know, oh man, what's another good example? There's like certain things that like are out of stock as a soft cover, but the select hardcover kind of format. And I get that, you know what I mean? Like it makes sense to a degree, but like Like I think that like okay, cool, Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars. That's not something that's going to turn over every week, but you're going to sell 2 or 3 a month, and it's something that's going to lead to other sales, and that's another one that's gone. And then there's some stuff that just goes and never comes back. It feels like it's more frequent this year, and maybe I'm just noticing it more. You know what I mean, because of the DC stuff, but it's definitely. I don't know, man. It's just something that I feel like is just accelerating.
Yeah, Secret Wars being out, that makes little to no sense to me, because that's like a gateway comic. That's like you buy this one hardcover and all of a sudden you know a little bit about every character, and next thing you know you can spread everywhere. And it's like that's the right kind of comic you want there. And I don't know, that stuff's really strange. But well, I have a few more things I want to bring up to you.
Yeah, sure.
You mentioned before, on our email, that you were less afraid of single issue comics going away than this being an issue. And I think that's interesting because, a lot of the narrative, granted, much of it was pushed by some, let's say, bad actors, was that with all the stuff that was going on with DC, that single issues were going bye-bye instantaneously. Now, it seems likely that that's not happening given the fact that they continue to announce more and more single issue comics. So I'm interested, why are you less afraid of single issue comics disappearing than this backlist? Like, that seems kind of a flip from what most people are feeling.
I mean, I think that with single issues, I think it's probably less. See, and this is where we get out of my element, where I don't know all the details in terms of like the cost involved and things like that. And I'll admit my ignorance there, like all day long. But I feel like it's less costly for them to keep a run of that out there. They can print a single, let it go out of print. If it doesn't sell great, it's gone. Trade is a much more costly investment, I think. You get it out there, and if it's just going to sit in the warehouse and not turn over, that's a problem. Now, the issue that I think that I'm afraid of is that we're seeing a lot more focus on, do we need these, like with these trades that we're reprinting and things like that, do we need them at all? And 6 out of 10 times, the answer is probably no. But the problem is then you start getting into a category where, well, who's deciding the other 4 times? And you could say, well, it's based off of numbers. But if you did that, then how is something like, say, Long Halloween, which is not going to be generating giant numbers every year,
but will be generating numbers every year?
Exactly. Like that's the thing. Like, how is that going to fare? And like, I don't think single issues. I mean, the number one most obvious reason why I'm not concerned about single issues going away is because they're still promoting stuff. They're still greenlighting stuff. They're still, producing stuff, like that's easy to track. You know what I mean? I can look at that and be like, cool, we've got, I don't think there's any end in sight for that, but I think that, and I don't think graphic novels are going away, but I think that there maybe there's a desire to move to a more slimmed down approach with graphic novels. And that might be worth it because I mean, there's definitely a lot of stuff that, we don't order. You know what I mean? Because It's just like, this is never going to sell. But there's those evergreen books that you don't want to lose. You know what I mean? Like, you don't want to lose Death in the Family. You don't want to lose, here's a good one. This is a really good example because it's something that very rarely sells, but it leads to many other sales, and it's something always requested. Legion trades, Great Darkness Saga. You know what I mean?
Like 5 years later,
people are going to be beating down exactly. Stuff like that, like they're not beating down the door for it, but I guarantee you it's something that turns over once or twice a month. I know ours did when we had it, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like, if you have enough books like that, it encourages more readership.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying, where it's like when the line gets blurry between that Cosmic Odyssey and the Killing Joke, where it's like you said 6 out of 10 you don't necessarily need, but if all of a sudden 2 of the 6 get mixed up with the other 2 or 2 of the 4, then next thing you know, well, like here's a good example, and this is just something I've observed in recent years. I don't particularly like omnibuses personally. Omnibuses
Right.
I find to be terribly unwieldy, but at the same time, it's like I have the first volume of Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four and FF run in omnibus form, and I think it's a total of 2 volumes, so it's not a gigantic thing. The problem is the second one has been out of print for forever, and like it's now like $1 billion proposition to try to acquire it. And I think it's
because it's an omnibus format, it's expensive for them to reprint.
Exactly. But I think that once you get into the reprint market being like a speculator market, because it's so rare to like find these things, that's another like indicator that maybe something is awry here. But I am interested, tying into all of this. Like, this is something you've been noticing. It's something that you've definitely been observing in the marketplace. Have you heard other retailers talk about this?
A little bit, not a lot. Not a lot. I think a little bit. I feel like if you brought it up to John over at Big Bang, I feel like he probably notices. You know what I mean? Because it sounds like they move a ton of graphic novels.
Mm-hmm.
So you know what? I'll give you a perfect example. The Charles Soule Star Wars stuff, the Darth Vader stuff.
Awesome.
You can only get volume 4.
What? Why 4?
Yeah, it's been that way probably about 2-3 months.
There's no logic to that. That's the thing that's weird. Is like, I mean, if you were talking about like rational like capitalism or something like that, you would at least have volume 1 is the one, like the one that you have out there. But only volume 4. I mean, that's nonsense.
Yep, exactly. Yep. Only volume 4. So that's, like, I think it's probably something that a lot of people probably aren't thinking about,
mm-hmm.
but it's probably become more of a thing. And I think that, like, once it's brought up, I think people are like, you know what, you're right, and some people just may not care. I might be a weirdo. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but it's definitely, I don't want to see backlist go that way. And I mean, like, I'm not saying like keep everything in print for me just because I sell a ton of weird stuff, which I do. You know what I mean? Like, I can't remember, there was some old Top Cow stuff that we sold the trades of last week. You know what I mean? So, mm-hmm. I mean, like, I stock deep. So, I mean, I know like we're an anomaly, but one of my stores, we dedicate, only say 600 facings to graphic novels. Most of my stores, are bookshelf style. Just about everything in print you can think of.
Mm-hmm.
But, I have one that's more boutique style, and it's just, it's just the bangers, like we said. However, when I start to notice that some of the bangers aren't available, that's when I start worrying about just how this whole thing is changing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, this to me does seem like a very big issue, especially because as the distributors kind of fracture and Lunar having the Killing Joke, being the only one that has the Killing Joke is a perfect example. I mean, it's like not only.
Yeah, dude, I ordered like 80 copies. I saw that and I was like, I need 90 of these.
Well, I mean, but the thing is not only is that like confusing because like the inventory isn't necessarily there, but also the fact that it's with the one who's supposed to be the single issue distributor. I mean, once you start getting to the point where it's confusing where to find it, let alone if you can acquire it, is just strange. I have to say though, like, I feel like I owe my local shop an apology because sometimes I walk around their shelves and I'm like, this is so random. Like, why do they only have these ones here? Like, what the hell is going on? And I'm like, maybe they just can't even get it.
Yeah, dude, that's exactly probably what it is. I mean, there is a ton of stuff that just disappears and never comes back. And sometimes, that's okay. I get it. The New 52 stuff, I get that. But like, certain Spider-Man books, certain Batman books, certain X-Men books, there's just certain things that like, they're it's like we said, they're not going to sell big numbers every year. And you know what? Maybe it's something that, maybe it's something reflected in sales. And maybe, like I said, I'm alone on this and maybe I'm not, maybe I'm just an outlier, but I mean, I really, really think that a lot of stores are probably like missing out on, being able to sell certain books because I mean, the way that people read books these days is they want to go from this pivotal event to this pivotal event to this pivotal event, you know, like, and if you don't have that one in the middle,
it breaks it.
You're kind of screwed. Yeah, it breaks it. It's frustrating for them, and it's frustrating for us. And then, you know, how do we start to kind of change the line to what is pivotal? You know what I mean? Like, what's the thing that, like, you know, kind of like separates, you know, the stories, you know, your Cosmic Odyssey and your Killing Joke, you know? I mean, Cosmic Odyssey may not be that important. I can live without it, but, you know, are we going to just go off of data? You know what I mean? I don't think that works for our industry.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that's scary.
Yeah. I feel like there's going to be some listener who's going to be really mad at us for continuously bringing up Cosmic Odyssey as like the one that nobody wants. Not that nobody wants it, but you know what I'm saying. But, well, so.
No, I know. It's a great story and I love it, but I'm just
not the Killing Joke.
In sales.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just strictly in sales. I mean, but like, that's the thing. Like, I feel like with comics and like our industry, I feel like that, like, as a whole, we've been so set on like data, you know, data. Like, I think that everybody's forgetting like what really, really makes comic retailers unique. And that's the fact that what we do it's as much an art as it is a science. And, you know, with curation and ordering and all that, like ordering for, you know, bookstores and comic stores and things like that, it's so much more complex and hard for me to teach people than, you know, some of the other lines and categories we carry, because, you know, you have so many other factors that play into it. You know what I mean? So like, you know, I mean, the perfect example is, you know, take Venom Volume 4. You know, my orders were going to increase this month on all of the Venom trades because King of Black.
Right.
And, you know, like, you know, it's all these little factors that a purchaser, a buyer is going to know because they're rooted in it. You know what I mean? They have that background knowledge. And I mean, you know, going by, you know, data, going by, you know, sales data, I mean, that's super crucial. Like, I agree with that. But if you remove the knowledge of like what buyers want or what readers want completely from it, if you remove the human element from it and you're just going off of numbers, then you run into the same problem that the Amazon stores have. Like, have you ever been into a physical Amazon store?
I have. Yeah. They're a little weird.
They're weird, right? Because you know how they stock them, right?
Yeah. That's only based off of, I think, like a combination of sales and like star ratings or something.
And zip codes.
Even so, like based off of what already sells there, isn't that like kind of like selling to like opening a pizza restaurant in like a place that has like a million pizzerias?
Right. That's exactly right. Like, that's the thing. Like, the way that, like, I went into one in San Diego a few years ago, and I was like, damn, this is a nice store, and the staff was real good. Staff was real friendly, and I was like, shit, if they learn how to sell comics, we might be in trouble. And then I realized, I'm like, man, Amazon's not really a threat to my business at all, because they don't have that. They can't do what we do as retailers. They don't have that human element. And I was looking at their shelves, look at their graphic novels, and they had whatever the newest volume of Saga was at the time. I think it was volume 7. They had a bunch of that. And they had Saga volume 1 and 2, but then nothing else. And then they had, I think they had like Before the Inkall, but then they didn't have the Inkall. Like, it was weird. It was so weird because there was no rhyme or reason. You know what I mean? So you had like whatever the newest volume was, because that's what obviously the algorithms and the sales data said, you know, we got a lot of. And this was after the books had come out. You know what I mean? Like, it just, I don't know, man. And it's on a smaller scale. You can see it at Barnes & Noble too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, if you look at their manga, if you look at their graphic novels.
Yeah. Well, this is definitely something to watch. I mean, this is going to be really interesting to see. But Steve, thank you so much for coming on to talk about this big theme for the year, because I don't know. I'm very interested to see how this one plays out. I hope it's a short term, you know, COVID driven thing, but at the same time, it definitely is something to watch.
Yeah, no problem at all. Thanks for having me on. And, you know, yeah, I hope you're right too. I mean, like I said, it's probably something like that. And, you know, because the hunger for this material is bigger than it's ever been. We're selling more graphic novels than we've ever sold.
That was Steve Anderson from Third Eye Comics. And to close, we have the grand poobah of The Beat, one of the finest comic sites around, as Heidi MacDonald closes up this episode with a chat about the potential end of single issues and the rise of webcomics. Here she is. Yo, everybody, I'm here with Heidi MacDonald, the grand poobah of The Beat, the long-running comics and pop culture site. Maybe the best comic site out there? I don't know. I don't decide these things. But we're here to talk about 2020 and more specifically, Heidi's defining theme to this crazy year for the world and in comics. And Heidi, I'm not going to lie. When you told me your theme of the year, it was very, very on brand, but also fitting to 2020. It's a real question. Let's start there. What was your defining theme for the year?
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure when we get to talk, and I'm pleased to be helping sum up 2020. Well, I'm not pleased with 2020, but I guess it's good to vent about it, right? So yeah, my theme was I've had this on the site for a long time, but the doomsday clock, the ticking doomsday clock for the pamphlet, for the periodical, the floppy, the comic book, and I think we definitely ticked a few seconds closer to midnight on that clock in 2020.
The thing is, and this is, I'm not trying to make you sound like the Heidi who cried the pamphlets dying, but it is interesting that like this is a recurring thing. This is a thing that you brought up before.
Yes.
What do you think it was about 2020 that made it feel like we're getting really closer? Is it like distributors? Is it publishers? Or what is it?
Well, it's a little bit of both. I mean, obviously, we saw the tremendous weakness in the distribution chain. You could not buy comic books for I've forgotten now. What was it? 5 weeks, 6 weeks?
Well, I mean, I guess it depends if you include DC's efforts through Lunar and UCS, but it was like, I think ultimately Diamond was closed for like either 8 weeks or 9 weeks.
Yes, it was a substantial amount of time. And, the narrow distribution hose here was a bit of a shocker. And as I pointed out, I can't remember if we did a podcast. I know I did so many podcasts during the shutdown. But, as I kept pointing out, it's like, yes, we're having a pandemic, but you can buy food, you can buy books, you can buy clothes, you can buy anything you want, but not comic books. And that's pretty serious. So, and, you could continue to buy graphic novels because by and large, they were all available via different ways of purchase. And most graphic novels, I mean, there's only in the direct market, only Images and Dynamite, I'd say, are the biggest ones who are just through Diamond now. So, and they had some issues, they had some problems. So, yeah. So the death of the pamphlet was literal for a few weeks there.
Yeah. It was gone.
It was gone. The pamphlets were gone. So that was a bit of a shockaroonie. And then there's all DC's shenanigans. And, I'm not convinced that DC's shenanigans are in good faith. And especially given all the crazy times at AT&T, Warner Media, Warner Brothers, all the way down the line. But I mean, I just think it's extremely significant that DC is doing, and to be honest, this is kind of what I said for a long time, but now that it's happening, I'm like, you know what, maybe I was wrong. But, they're going to a lot of digital distribution, digital first, and then they're doing these oversized anthologies.
Right.
And really doubling down on those for their future state, starting off the year. And, this is a format that even a few retailers have said would be awesome, and I've said would be awesome, and it's awesome everywhere but in the United States. I mean, obviously, anthologies of comics are the standard serialization format in Japan. The tankobon, and magazines like Shonen Jump and so on, and also in Europe, they have comics magazines there that serialize things. So, it's a proven format elsewhere, but the anthology has been pretty much dead here in the United States, just as a sales giant for a long time. However, I guess with their Walmart anthology experiment, it proved it. Some people liked it or not. I mean, we never, we don't hear any sales chatter from DC. That's really the biggest loss of the convention. Like if we had cons still, at some point we'd have to hear Nancy Spears. Well, I guess we'd have to hear, her standing up and saying something. But we don't get that anymore. So yeah, the DC, had their Walmart experience last year. with these oversized comics, and now they're doing them for the main line. And so, is this a good thing? I guess the jury's out.
Okay, so I actually literally just wrote my first entry for my like weekly 10 things column that I do. And it in a hilariously like large week of news for DC, where they announced like effectively that Bendis is going to be doing Justice League, and that Tom Taylor and Bruno Redondo are going to be doing a new Nightwing series, and that what's the third one? Oh yeah, James Tynion IV and Gil March are going to be doing a Joker series. The thing that interested me the most was the end of what else is happening with that Joker series, that it's going to have a backup, and that's going to be 40 pages, and it's going to be $4.99. And so the thing about, I mean, obviously I've long been a single issue optimist in a kind of opposite way of you, like we're yin and yang in some ways in that regard. I actually think that a lot of DC's actions indicate that maybe they're not interested in doing traditional single issues in the same way, but they might be morphing the form, and they'll still be doing it. I mean, I know a lot of people were talking about like they don't think they're going to have comics after March, and that has very quickly proven to be wrong. And
Yes.
so I guess like, is it more that you think that the single issue is morphing, or is it more? Do you think that we're now closer to a path of like it going bye-bye?
Well, look, it's not going to go bye-bye any more than the vinyl record went bye-bye. Okay. At the very worst, I suppose you could say it will be a nostalgia item that some people want. Now, I think my opposition to the periodical format has always been that it was the end product of the supply chain, I guess. I always felt that the graphic novel was a better format for many, many reasons. It was a better form, or a more permanent format. It was a better format for reading. It was a better format for storage. You could put it on a shelf, and it was a satisfying chunk. It was a more satisfying chunk. And so I guess, my objections, or my constant, please, dire predictions that the pamphlet was dying, was really about recognizing the graphic novel as a at least equal format. And guess what?
You've been
That
proven right.
I was right. I was right. I mean, I wish I'd put money on that, but I guess I did, really. And the explosion of the graphic novel, the acceptance of it by people of all ages, children that YA and young readers take to it like a duck to water. Young readers don't like comic books anymore. When I was a kid, we did like them. That was a long time ago. We're talking the 70s, and throughout the 80s, some people like the periodical. But look at it now. It's a collector format.
Yeah,
Okay,
totally.
it's a collector, and like I said, even though I'm not entirely clear why DC is doing all these things. Well, let me back up. Serialization is awesome. Okay, serialization is fine, and we see that everywhere. And we see that in the success of webcomics. I mean, this was another thing I constantly pointed out during the great comics drought of 2020. Hey, guess what? Webtoon and Tapas are fine. Okay,
Oh,
they're
yeah.
just chugging along. Everybody's reading them, and I still find that a lot of people in the traditional comics publishing world just don't get Tapas and Webtoon, and how huge they are, especially Webtoon.
Yeah.
I have this Webtoon backpack that I got as a thank you for doing a panel with them, and which I use as my backpack when I go out on an urban expedition in these, disease-ridden city. And I get so many people, young people,
Mm-hmm.
who are like, "Ooh, do you work for Webtoons? Oh, you read Webtoons?" Like people recognize that logo.
Yeah. Well, so here's a quick little story about Webtoons. So my wife, her friend, was served an ad on Instagram for Laura Olympus. And so she was like, I don't know what this is. And she clicked. She didn't read comics. She clicked on it. She read it. She loved it. And now she's like still reading like 5 different series a year later. Never read comics before then, but reads it on her phone. And it's funny because my wife sent my article. I wrote an article that went up today on Polygon about what 2020 meant for comics. And I had Webtoon in there, and it's funny because like her friend immediately glommed onto that because that is comics to her. This is like
yes.
this is a woman probably in her early to mid 30s who is in Anchorage, Alaska, who comics to her are Webtoon. And I think that's the interesting thing. I mean, the other side of your theme to the year was like maybe the floppy's heading towards its in game, maybe not permanent death, but more of as a even nichier item. But webcomics are blowing up, and so for you, when you say like the rise of the webcomic, when you were or emailing me about that, do you mean primarily Webtoon and Tapas, or do you mean like all varieties?
Well, I mean, all varieties have been, thriving. Okay. And I mean, you listen, David, I wrote my first Are Web Comics Here to Stay article, in 2003 for Publishers Weekly. And, I talked to Penny Arcade and PvP. And they're like, well, how do you make money from them? And, uh, you know, that's still always a big question, I guess. But uh, the micropayments, all subscriptions, all this has proven that it's people love to read comics on their phones. And the other thing with webtoons is that this form of serialization, and they advertise on Instagram. Now, I've never seen it because I'm too old. But apparently, I should create some burner account or something because, again, talking to kids, I have this 13-year-old girl who saw my backpack. She's a daughter of a friend, was like, "Oh, Webtoon, I love Webtoon." I was like, "Oh," of course, I'm quizzing her. "How do you know about it?" She's like, "Well, I see it on Instagram all the time." I'm like, "Oh, very, very smart." Out of my demographic. But yeah, they advertise on Instagram constantly, and that's how they get so much readership. But listen, one of the most interesting things to me was during the shutdown that a couple of comics publishers actually turned to Webtoon to distribute their comics, notably AWA,
Yeah.
right? Okay, Bill Jummis, you still got it. And then DC has actually done something, I think, with Webtoon, right? And
I don't have they. I know Archie is doing a direct to Webtoon.
Archie.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's been some kind of canoodling there with a lot of publishers and Webtoon and Tapas.
Yeah.
And but I feel that what format, see, that the format that I feel is the most problematic one is actually not the web comic, but the digital comic. Selling what would be a 20-page, 22-page, whatever page comics periodical on the web. Now, you say, haha, what about Comixology? Well, of course, but they have launched a lot of digital originals on there, and they're amazing. Some of them have like incredibly talented people, big names.
Afterlift was awesome. It won the Eisner. It was a great book.
Eisner winners. And yet it's not until they're printed that people are like, oh, this is a great comic.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I do think it's interesting too. I think one of the problems with the like Webtoon and Tapas, it's like you say Webtoon, it's like not only do you know what Webtoon is as a company, but you know the format. It's like the infinite scroll. But when you say webcomic or digital comic, it's very nebulous. It's like what is the difference between a webcomic and a digital comic? Is there a difference? I don't really know. I mean, and then there's like you throw in other wrinkles like Panel Syndicate. It's like you can get a PDF or what is it, CBZ or CBR, all those different formats that are specific for comics. Right. And it's like those fit in there somewhere too. And I don't know. I do think the thing that's really smart about Webtoon, and I think it's why, although I think AWA's content is about as bad of a fit for the platform as you can possibly ask for.
Correct.
Is that it's a very intuitive feel. Like you know what it is, you know how to operate it, versus a lot of like the regular digital comics where it's like when you get a PDF, it's not the best fit. It doesn't fit perfectly. It's not designed for it, and you can feel that.
Correct. It is only readable, really, to my mind. Again, I'm an older demographic, but on the iPad. The iPad is purpose-built for reading comics. And, when the iPad was launched, that really did provide a boost to digital comics. And, all meaning that format, and also web comics and scrolling comics, but particularly digital comics, because that's how I prefer to read all of my comics that I need to review now. I read them on my iPad. I don't read them on my computer. I don't read them on my phone. The iPad is the proper medium for it. So yes, and when I see DC, I mean, I said, again, I can't remember if I said this on your podcast. I know I said it on my own podcast, but during the lockdown, I said, you know what, if I was Marvel and DC, I'd just start doing webtoon type style comics, a page a day, 4 pages a week, whatever. And, they are kind of doing that with some of their digital comics. DC is, they are doing, this launches on Monday and Tuesday. I'm not sure if it's a page a week or 2 pages a week or what. I don't think they've actually launched yet, have they?
DC did the Deceased at World's End, Hope at World's End book was like every week for 14 weeks there was like a 99-cent release, and they've done things like that in the past. They also were doing some really interesting stuff with James Tynion's Batman stuff on Instagram, which I thought was pretty interesting. I don't know. I mean, but here's the thing for me is like, I think that, and I don't think that you're not saying this, but I think that all of this stuff kind of works together in an interesting way. And I think like that's, again, while it was a bad fit, I think AWA, like trying to be opportunistic and trying to work on a platform that already has this huge readership foundation when comics are down was smart, because it helps with discoverability of the print product.
Yes.
And there can be reciprocal feedback there. So tying all of this together though, I think it's really interesting seeing people like, I've mentioned James Tynion multiple times, but him and Steve Fox doing Razor Blades, the horror anthology, or the horror magazine, that anthology series.
I just want to jump in here. James Tynion had a huge year this year.
Big year.
And a big year. He was really like the guy as far as I'm concerned. And, not only because a Joker War was huge and Punchline was big just back. In fact, I interviewed him at C2E2 just before it all ended about Punchline. But yeah, launching Razor Blades, his newsletter has really been great, where he's, opened up and talked about a lot of things. And then his Image book that launched, which has the long title that I can't remember.
Department of Truth. Yeah,
I was thinking of the children.
Something is killing the children.
Something is killing the children. Yeah, I mean, he's had all these, he had a huge year in 2020. So no, it does. I absolutely, it all works together. But I think that's the key to the evolution of the periodical. I just go back to this though, like, who is the customer? Who is the reader? Okay. And, I still see some people trying to get kids hooked on the comic book format, and, they're not going to go for it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know one kid who actually does, also, I polled my friends' children. There's a lot of young kids in my family, but they're not quite old enough to be reading, on their own yet. But, this one kid that I know does have a box full of Simpsons comics. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And, some other, now he's getting into Marvel and DC and that kind of stuff. So, but that was a while ago. I'm not sure where he is with that now. I should ask him. He's writing his own graphic novel. So obviously it introduced, it influenced him.
It is worth noting really quick though, that I think even Marvel recognized that the single issue format's not for the young people anymore. Cause this year they it doesn't feel like this year, cause it feels like 500 years ago, but they actually finally, made the deal with Scholastic that everybody's been waiting for them to make for forever.
Right. Yes. So that's, and that's another sign of the times.
Right.
And hey, DC had huge success with their YA line. There used to be Zoom and Ink, and then now it's just DC. But whatever you call them, they're doing very well, and they're doing very well in comic shops. And that's another part of this equation, is that comic shops are very comfortable selling these products now.
Mm-hmm.
They're comfortable selling kids books. They're comfortable selling, graphic novels to kids. And so that's a huge evolution, because believe me, the classic shops of the 80s and 90s were not in on that.
No.
So
I remember growing up there and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm just going to grab the X-Men stuff because I like the X-Men. But can we jump back to the Razor Blades point though? So
yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
No, it's okay. I was just going to, I think the interesting thing is some creators like Tynion, like James, and maybe even like Donny Cates and Jeff Shaw. Wait, was it Jeff Shaw? No, Donny Cates and Dylan Andrews, Dylan Burnett. God, I'm just mixing up all the names now. But went over and did the One Who Feeds over at Panel Syndicate. Some creators feel a little bit more like they can make that move over to digital because there's an opportunity there. And like you saw like Scott Snyder also do like a Kickstarter this year and do a really smart thing, I think, with his kind of director's cut for Noctera. There's a lot of really interesting things happening. I guess my question for you is like, do you see, let's say that like the single issue format in your theory winds down a bit, still exists, but isn't as dominant as it was in the past. And maybe let's say webcomics in all forms kind of lifts a little bit. Do you think that there's a natural lateral fit for creators who are used to making them in print?
Yes. I mean, short answer, yes. I mean, again, it's serialization, but I think we might see people getting away from, it's 20 pages long or it's 22 pages long.
Right.
Maybe it's 10 pages long this week, and maybe it's the next episode is 27 pages long. The Mandalorian has really shown us that we could love something and it doesn't have to be 30 minutes long. It can be 25 or 35 or 45. And so, yeah, I think that all of this is, leading to greater freedom, but, with freedom, you lose money. And, it's like, what? And so that's why I'm always like, what is the customer? Who is the audience for this?
Mm-hmm.
And like we see now, going back, the last great hurrah for the periodical was the New 52, which is what, 10 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
9 years ago? Yeah. So, and that drew in a lot of younger readers, college age readers, let's say, who hadn't really been into DC before. But the excitement over this New 52 initiative got them all excited about Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Grifter, all over again, and it was a huge success. And then we've never really seen that again because there's just too much choice. When New 52 launched, I'm not sure there was the iPad around.
It was. It was very early in its
yes,
days. I was carrying an iPad with me when it launched, and I remember it was like a brick,
right?
Comparatively,
right. But it, like, social media did not quite have the reach it does now. When that launched, it was just a very different world. And we get everything through so many different channels now, from TikTok to YouTube to reading them on our phone. And the competition is just so much stronger. So yeah, people love a cliffhanger. People love a story that continues, and then they get to turn the last page and there's a shocking change, and then they got to wait to see what happens. People enjoy the suspense of serialization, so that's why I'm saying there is an eternal appeal to this form of storytelling. And whether the 32 page, floppy is the optimal mode to reach these customers, these readers, these consumers, that is really more of a question. And, obviously someone at DC thinks that it's not, and that a larger anthology that has more to offer is a better way. And, I don't think that's necessarily I think that's a great format, to be honest.
I do too.
It gives you a chance to put your top gal, top person, your top creators in the opening spot, and then give newcomers a shot in the backup. That's how we do this.
Yeah.
That's always been the beauty of the anthology. So, in theory, it's a good way to service that market. And look, the periodical would go on, and look at the success of Vault Comics. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, they really come on big in this year during the pandemic. Obviously, lots of publishers are putting out lots of periodical comic books that people are reading. So it's not like nobody reads them, and they enjoy waiting. They enjoy waiting a month to get the next issue. Maybe they don't enjoy waiting 2, 3, 5, 7 months. Okay. So, that's a big part of it. But like I said, it's okay. So I changed my prediction of the pamphlet being doomed. If the pamphlet as the primary form, the primary presentation of the comic book medium to the public is over.
So it's more like the formats are kind of morphing, but also the mix that they, comprise in the industry will also be morphing. I mean, that to me makes sense. I mean, if you told me that the traditional format for like the traditional 20-page single issue comic format in like 5 years was only like 20% of the market, and the rest is like graphic novels, digital, and like a weird mix of like the, anthologies, and then maybe like honestly, like I think the backup thing that they're doing with the Joker is really smart, because I don't know if a Punchline book would work as an ongoing, but do I think that could give that Joker book like a 10 or 15% boost in orders? Yeah, I think it
Sure.
could. And if that's enough to like have more of an impact and more penetration in the market, I think that's worth it. I think that's smarter than trying to, retrofitting an existing format with more content that makes the whole thing more valuable to people. I think that's smart. So I think it, like, to me, my takeaway from what you've been saying is it's less that like things are dying. It's more that things are mutating.
Yes. But I think I find that that retailers are finally comfortable with this idea.
Yep.
And I mean, Brian Hibbs, who obviously he writes a column, in case your listeners don't know, he writes a column on retailing for The Beat, which is very, very well read and influential. But I mean, he's been doing it for a long time. The Beat just picked it up. And but I've been reading Brian's column for decades, and he's definitely, he's still standing up for the periodical and as a separate way to monetize, to fund these projects, and he's not wrong on
Cash
that.
flow. Yep.
Cash flow. It's about the cash flow. But even Brian, has evolved to be like, yeah, and these graphic novels are fine too. It's fine when they do it. It's fine when Dog Man comes out as a graphic novel first. It doesn't have to be periodicals first. And I think that's what a lot of my argument was with people over the years, that it didn't have to be comic books first. It could just be a graphic novel first, and it would find its audience just fine. Just throwing this in there, though, just, talking about all the different ways. I was writing up, I'm writing up my own year end, and, everybody's doing their year end, so I'll have to check out your Polygon year end story. But I was checking out the Goodreads Choice Awards, Readers' Choice Awards. Every year Goodreads, which is an Amazon company, does the readers, vote on the books of the year in various categories. And the graphic novel that won this year was one I'd never heard of, Heartstopper Volume 3. Have you ever heard of that?
I am currently Googling it. I have not.
Yeah, right. So, well, I Googled the heck out of it also. It's by someone named Alice Oseman. Now, so she's English. She's a YA author, but she's also an artist. So she started doing this. It's a queer romance about two young men. And she started doing it as a web comic at first. It runs on Tapas and Webtoon and all the other I shouldn't leave out my friends at Hiveworks, because they're huge as well. And there's all these other web comic-y kind of places coming, coming fast and furious. But anyway, she did it as a web comic, and then it was picked up by, actually, I forgot the name of the publisher, but it's a very mainstream publisher, Hachette. Picked it up a couple years ago. Like volume 1 and 2 already came out, and it's guess it's doing very well.
Well, and I think the interesting thing is, like, I think one thing that people forget about like Webtoon and Tapas and all those other platforms is that just because you're putting it on there doesn't mean you can't ultimately put it in print as well. And it's like, I think that's the interesting thing about the ecosystem of comics is the cash flow from a creator standpoint used to be single issues into trades. Now it can be something different. Now it could be like Charles Forsman. He does Patreon specific serialization stuff. And you know what he's doing? Netflix shows. And I don't think he's complaining right now. And so I think that I don't know. I mean, I like the idea that one thing that 2020 made people do, and obviously there's a lot of pain that came with this, but it made them think, is this the only way I can do this? And the answer was no. And I think that that's a very, very valuable insight long-term for comics.
Absolutely, 100%. And, you have to be very, very nimble and adaptable in 2020. And most people were, in fact, almost everybody was. I think it's really shocking how how well comics weathered this storm, considering how bad it started out with this, with the complete shutdown of the distribution model. And I mean, I'm sure I know you're talking to a retailer for this series as well, but the other thing about the periodical comic book is that back issue sales are huge.
Oh yeah.
And home shopping network for comic books is huge.
Right.
Like these retailers start going on Facebook, and during the early days when I was literally stuck at home, I watched a few of them.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't need more books in my house, so I never bought anything. But like these have really caught on, and obviously eBay sales are booming, and back issue sales are huge, and of collectibles.
Mhm.
Okay. But people buy them to read too. They don't want to pay the $5 cover price when, go and scrounge in that digital dollar bin, I guess. But yeah, they found all different ways to repurpose this material in all different formats. And yeah, I think it's a success story, really.
I do too. I do too.
I mean, what though, David? I worry that I say that because I'm sitting here reading people's PR. If I was at a convention, and people were bitching and moaning at the bar, it would be a different story.
I will say this though. I mean, I go to less like events like that than you do, but in my experience, there's a lot of bitching and moaning no matter what. And so I have to imagine that the story might have been slightly different, but at the same time, it would have just, I don't know. I do kind of wonder if this ends up being like this fulcrum moment where people were kind of forced to change and they found new solutions that work better. And maybe, I don't know, maybe that pain, if you were in those conversations, the pain would have been more evident, but maybe the success would have been too. I don't know. I honestly don't, I don't know it'll be interesting to see what happens whenever whoever the first to really, like the first big con to enter the fray is after post-vaccine, because that will be, I mean, I feel like every journalist in comics needs to fly to that convention and just like soak in the details.
Oh, yeah, while wearing a mask and a full hazmat suit.
Exactly.
But after I've had my vaccine, then I will do that. One other thing though, I would just on the negative note though, I will say, like I said, I think in some ways what DC is doing is not a bad thing. I think firing everybody who, laying off everybody who worked in their direct sales department is a really bad thing. But some of the actual products that are coming out are not that evil on their own. I am troubled though that they're doing Milestone as digital, because people would love to hold that in their hands.
Totally.
And I mean, I'm not doubting that it will be in print at some point. And I guess it's a kind of a, it's like the Justice League on a Snyder Cut to HBO Max. I guess, Milestone is that for DC Digital, like it's the big lure, I suppose.
I think if it ends with a nice big hardcover, that's a different story. But we'll see about that. I don't know how it's gonna roll.
So there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions about all this, and we don't really have a lot of the, we don't have as many metrics as we used to. So just, and a lot of that is just because we don't hang out anymore. So because the sharing of information at conventions was an amazing thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, this could be a whole, other half hour, but how the comics industry has adapted to not having these get-togethers is a huge story. It's huge for people's psychology, and they're, so many people, like myself included, slave alone at home for weeks. And then it's like, okay, I get to go to a con and see humans. And, I've seen a lot of creators really miss that camaraderie. And, so yeah, conventions will be back someday safely, I'm sure.
I hope so. I mean, I think things will start to kind of normalize, but I mean, there's a lot of questions from 2020. I don't know if there's a lot of answers, but there's going to be a lot of questions that lead to interesting things. But Heidi, thank you for coming on to talk about, single issues, web comics, and where everything's headed. I appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, anytime, David. Stay safe. You have a great holiday, and happy 2021.
You too. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Random House Graphics' Gina Gagliano, whom you can find on Twitter at @_Gina Gagliano, Third Eye Comics' Steve Anderson, who you can find at Third Eye's site, Twitter, and 6 locations, and The Beat's Heidi MacDonald, who you can find on Twitter at ComicsAce and on our website at comicsbeat.com. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating and review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show on Patreon at patreon.com/offpanel. And when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketch at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content and its members-only forum. You can find Off Panel and Sketch on social media by liking it on Facebook at /sketched. That's SKTCHD. Following on Twitter and Instagram at @sketchcomic and following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Brandon DePillis, Patrick Brower, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Josh Williamson, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Cute, SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Riera, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Eslin, Phil Myra, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pacella, Torrin Grunbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Salate, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwan, Vita Ayala, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinella, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brandon Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogert, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Strelli, Ford Gilmore, David Brody, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxwell, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.